The wind howling across the rooftop of the Musutifu commercial building was deafening, yet to Izuku Midoriya, the world had gone entirely, suffocatingly silent. A few moments ago, he had been clinging to the leg of the greatest hero in the world. He had flown through the sky, terrified but exhilarated, desperate for a few seconds of the symbol of peace's time. He had asked the question that had defined his entire pathetic, fragile existence. It was a question born of 14 years of mockery, of burnt notebooks, of spider lily flowers placed cruelly on his desk, and of his mother's tears. Can someone without a quirk be a hero like you? He had closed his eyes when he asked it, terrified of the answer. When he opened them, the towering, godlike physique of All Might was gone, replaced by a skeletal, gaunt man who was coughing up blood. The illusion of the world's greatest hero had literally deflated before Izuku's eyes, revealing a broken, damaged man underneath. But it wasn't the physical transformation that shattered Izuku. It was the words that followed. Pro-heroes are always having to risk their lives, Toshinori Yagi said, his sunken blue eyes looking away from the trembling boy in the middle school uniform. His voice, lacking the booming, charismatic echo that Izuku had memorized from thousands of video clips, sounded incredibly tired. Some villains just can't be beaten without powers. So no. I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. Izuku's breath hitched. His lungs felt like they had been filled with liquid lead. If you want to help people, there are plenty of other ways to do it, All Might continued, walking toward the heavy metal door that led into the stairwell. You could become a police officer. They get crap because the heroes capture most of the villains, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to have a dream, young man. Just make sure your dreams are attainable. Be realistic. The metal door creaked open. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get this sludge villain to the authorities. The door clicked shut. The latch engaged with a sharp, metallic snap that echoed across the empty roof. Izuku didn't move. He stood frozen in the center of the concrete expanse, his battered yellow backpack hanging loosely from his shoulder. His hands, covered in faint, pale scars from years of Katsuki Bakugo's explosive bullying, hung limply at his sides. Be realistic. The phrase echoed in his mind, bouncing around his skull until it became a cacophony of every voice that had ever spoken it to him. You should probably give it up. The doctor's apathetic drone. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. His mother's weeping apologies. Take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in your next life. Kaken's venomous roar. And now, the final nail in the coffin. The absolute, unassailable decree from God himself. All Might. Something inside Izuku Midoriya, a tightly coiled spring of optimism that he had stubbornly maintained for 10 years, finally snapped. It didn't break with a dramatic scream or a flood of tears. It broke with a quiet, horrifying click. Slowly Izuku's knees buckled. He fell to the rough, sun-baked concrete, his uniform pants tearing slightly at the friction. He stared at his trembling hands. No quirk. No power. Just fragile, useless flesh and bone in a world of gods and monsters. Hero society wasn't built on justice, he realized with a sudden, sickening clarity. It was built on a genetic lottery. It was a caste system masked by colorful spandex and merchandising. If you were born with power, you were celebrated. If you were born with a weak power, you were ordinary. If you were born with nothing, you were garbage. Izuku didn't know how long he sat on that roof. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the cityscape of Musutifu. Eventually, the chill of the evening wind penetrated his shock. He slowly picked himself up. His movements were mechanical, puppet-like. He walked to the stairwell, opened the door, and began the long descent. Each step down felt like a descent into a grave he was digging for himself. When he reached the street level, the city felt entirely alien to him. The bustling crowds, the neon signs flashing advertisements for hero agencies, the distant sounds of sirens, it all felt like a movie he was no longer participating in. He was a ghost haunting a world of the living. He began to walk. He didn't head toward his apartment. He couldn't face his mother right now. He couldn't face the sympathetic, pitying look in her eyes when he walked through the door, the silent confirmation that the world was too cruel for her fragile, quirkless son. Boom. A massive explosion rattled the windows of the street he was walking down. A plume of black smoke rose into the twilight sky a few blocks away. The distant, panicked screams of civilians reached his ears. A villain attack. A day ago, an hour ago, Izuku's legs would have moved on their own. He would have sprinted toward the danger, his burnt notebook clutched in his hands, eager to analyze the hero's quirks, desperate to learn, to observe, to hold on to his fantasy. He stopped on the sidewalk. Civilians were rushing past him, eager to get a look at the spectacle. "Did you hear? A villain captured a middle schooler!" A woman running past him gasped to her friend. "The heroes can't get close. He's using the kids' explosion quirk to keep them at bay." Explosion quirk. A middle schooler. Izuku's mind, sharp as ever, instantly connected the dots. The sludge villain All Might had dropped. The villain he had accidentally set free when he grabbed onto the hero's leg. Katsuki? For a fraction of a second, the old Izuku flared to life. Kaken is in trouble. I have to do something. I have to be realistic. The voice of All Might crushed the thought into dust. Izuku's green eyes, normally so wide and full of vibrant, nervous energy, dulled into a flat, dead emerald. Why should I? A new, foreign voice whispered in his mind. It was a voice born of pure, unadulterated apathy. Kaken told me to kill myself today. He burned my dreams. He has an amazing quirk. The heroes are there. The heroes only care about people with power. Let them save him. I am useless. I have nothing to offer. Izuku turned his back on the smoke. He put his hands in his pockets, pulled his head down, and walked in the opposite direction. He didn't know it yet, but in that single, agonizing moment of choice, Izuku Midoriya altered the trajectory of the universe. By walking away, by letting the embers of his heroic heart finally extinguish, he created a void within his soul. And nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. He walked for hours, taking trains blindly, transferring lines without looking at the maps. He just wanted to get away from the lights, away from the heroes, away from the suffocating presence of society. Night had fully fallen by the time he stepped off the train at the end of the line. He found himself on the extreme outskirts of the Musudafu prefecture, near the jagged, treacherous coastline where the city's development abruptly stopped. This wasn't the Dagoba municipal beach, choked with modern trash and appliances. This was a forgotten stretch of the coast, a place of sharp black rocks, crashing black waves, and dense, untamed coastal forests that had grown wild since the pre-Quark era. The air here was different. It smelled of ancient salt, decaying kelp, and ozone. A heavy, oppressive mist clung to the ground, obscuring the jagged rocks. Izuku scrambled down the steep embankment, his school shoes slipping on the wet stones. He didn't care if he fell. He almost wished he would. He found a small stretch of rocky beach at the base of the cliffs and sat down heavily on a piece of driftwood. The ocean was furious tonight, violently thrashing against the rocks, sending sprays of freezing salt water over his uniform. He stared out into the pitch-black abyss of the water. I hate it, he whispered to the roaring ocean. His voice cracked, the first emotion he had shown since the rooftop. I hate them all. Tears, hot and bitter, finally spilled over his freckled cheeks. He wasn't crying out of sadness anymore. He was crying out of rage. A deep, primal indignation that he had suppressed for over a decade. Why me? He screamed, his voice tearing at his throat. He grabbed a handful of wet pebbles and hurled them into the dark water. Why was I born wrong? Why does Katsuki get to be a god, and I have to be a bug? Why did you give me the heart of a hero and the body of a victim? He fell to his knees in the wet sand, gripping his hair, sobbing uncontrollably. The injustice of it all burned in his chest like battery acid. The heroes. The villains. The civilians who stood by and watched him get beaten in the alleyways because it wasn't their problem. The whole world was diseased. It was a hierarchy built on genetic mutations, a society that worshipped power while pretending to worship justice. As his sobs began to subside into ragged, hyperventilating gasps, a strange sensation washed over him. It wasn't a sound, and it wasn't a physical touch. It was a pressure. A distinct, rhythmic thrumming in the base of his skull, like a second heartbeat. It felt ancient. Cold, but strangely inviting. Izuku slowly raised his head, wiping the tears and snot from his face with his ruined sleeve. He looked around the desolate beach. Nothing but rocks and mist. But the pressure grew stronger. It was pulling him, tugging at the anger that was currently radiating from his chest. He stood up, his legs shaking, and began to follow the sensation. It led him away from the water and toward the towering black cliffs. As he approached the rock face, he noticed a fissure, a narrow, jagged crack in the stone, partially obscured by thick, dead vines. It was a cave entrance. The feeling was pouring out of this crack. It felt like a low-frequency hum that he felt in his teeth. Any sane person would have turned back. But Izuku Midoriya had nothing left to lose, and the utter lack of fear he currently felt was intoxicating. He squeezed himself through the fissure. The interior of the cave was pitch black, but the air was entirely stagnant, devoid of the salty moisture of the outside. It smelled like dust, ozone, and old copper. Blood. Izuku pulled his phone from his pocket and turned on the flashlight. The pale LED beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls of smooth, unnaturally flat stone. This wasn't a natural cave. The walls were carved. Elaborate, angular runes and geometric patterns that Izuku had never seen in any history book covered the surfaces. They looked sharp, aggressive, and incredibly old. He walked deeper into the tunnel, the silence absolute save for the crunch of his shoes on the stone floor. The pressure in his head was mounting, evolving from a whisper into a chorus of phantom voices. They weren't speaking words he could understand, but they carried emotions. Hatred. Ambition. Agony. Power. The tunnel opened up into a massive, cavernous chamber. Izuku swept his flashlight around. The room was perfectly pyramidal in shape. In the center of the chamber sat a raised stone dais, and on that dais rested an object. Izuku slowly approached it. It was a pyramid, perhaps 6 inches tall at its apex. It appeared to be made of a dark, metallic glass, etched with veins of a dull, dead crimson. It was covered in the same jagged runes as the walls. As Izuku stood over it, the flashlight in his hand flickered and died. Panic flared briefly in his chest, but before he could react, the object on the pedestal responded to his presence. The dull crimson veins running across its surface suddenly flared to life, glowing with an intense, bloody light that illuminated the entire chamber in a hellish red wash. The object, the holocron, began to levitate. It hovered an inch above the stone pedestal, rotating slowly. The hum in Izuku's head became deafening. Touch it. The command wasn't spoken. It was injected directly into his frontal lobe. Izuku was breathing heavily, his eyes wide, reflecting the red light. His rational mind, the mind of the analytical quirk nerd, screamed at him to run, to alert a pro-hero with a sensory quirk. But his heart, the heart that had just been shattered and filled with the dark, heavy sludge of hatred, urged him forward. He reached out his right hand. His fingers trembled as they neared the apex of the pyramid. The moment his skin made contact with the cold, glassy surface, a shockwave of energy blasted through the room. Dust violently flew outward from the pedestal. Izuku gasped, his back arching in agony as a searing heat shot up his arm and directly into his chest. Visions exploded in his mind. He didn't see heroes or quirks. He saw stars burning and collapsing. He saw massive armadas of triangular starships turning planets into glass. He saw men and women wielding blades of pure plasma, bending the very fabric of reality to their will, crushing the throats of their enemies without lifting a finger. He felt a cosmic web of energy that connected all living things, a web that could be plucked, twisted, and dominated by those with the will to do so. He saw a power that made quirks look like cheap parlor tricks. Izuku screamed, falling to his knees, clutching his head as the holocron spun faster and faster, its pieces separating and floating in a complex, geometric puzzle. From the center of the brilliant red light, a shadow began to pour outward. The shadow coalesced, drawing the red light into itself until it formed a towering, semi-translucent figure standing over the boy. It was the phantom of a man clad in ancient, jagged black armor. A dark hood obscured his face, but beneath the cowl, 2 eyes burned like dying yellow suns. The chamber was freezing now. Izuku's breath came out in white plumes. He stared up at the towering specter, paralyzed by a terror so absolute it eclipsed anything he had ever felt facing Katsuki, or a villain. When the phantom spoke, the voice was a deep, resonating baritone that seemed to echo from the bottom of an ocean. For 10,000 years I have slept in the dark of this miserable, forgotten world, the Sith Lord spoke. I have waited for a vessel. I expected a warlord. I expected a conqueror. And instead the Force brings me, a broken, weeping child. Izuku tried to speak, but his vocal cords were paralyzed. The pressure in the room was crushing him. The specter floated closer, leaning down to examine Izuku's face. The yellow eyes seemed to pierce through Izuku's skull, reading the boy's entire life in a fraction of a second. Ah, the ancient being murmured, the hostility in his voice shifting into a dark, cruel amusement. I see now. You are empty. A genetic anomaly on a world poisoned by localized mutations. They call you quirkless. They call you Deku. How? Izuku finally choked out, his voice a raspy whisper. How do you know that? I am Darth Kravos, the spirit proclaimed, standing tall. A dark lord of the Sith. Through the dark side of the Force, there is nothing hidden from me. I see your memories, Izuku Midoriya. I see the mockery. I see the explosive boy who torments you. I see the hulking brute in the ridiculous colored clothing who shattered your fragile delusions today. Kravos began to pace around Izuku, floating effortlessly over the stone floor. Your society is a fascinating tragedy, the Sith Lord mused. They worship these biological accidents they call quirks. A random reshuffling of DNA determines a man's worth. It is a pathetic, arbitrary system. They play at being gods and heroes, but they are blind to the true power of the universe. They do not know the Force. The Force? Izuku breathed. He was still kneeling, but the fear was slowly being replaced by an intense, burning curiosity. The Force is the energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Those who are sensitive to it can bend reality to their will. It is a power earned through discipline, passion, and the breaking of chains. It is not handed out by the roll of genetic dice. Kravos stopped in front of Izuku, staring down at him. And you, boy, you are deeply sensitive to it. I felt the shockwave of your despair miles away. Your anger awakened me. Your hatred is a beacon in the dark. Izuku looked down at his hands. Me? But I'm nobody. I have no power. You have no quirk, Kravos corrected sharply. Quirks are a crutch for the weak. You have the potential to wield the Force, but only if you are willing to let the boy who groveled for the approval of false heroes die in this cave. Izuku's mind raced. Everything he had ever known was being upended. Why are you telling me this? What do you want from me? I am a memory, Kravos sneered, gesturing to his translucent form. A recording of a mind left behind in this holocron to preserve the legacy of the Sith. But you are flesh and blood. You have the raw power. I offer you a choice, Izuku Midoriya. Return to your city. Live out your days as a pathetic, quirkless insect, trampled beneath the boots of your heroes and villains until you die forgotten. Kravos leaned in close, his burning yellow eyes filling Izuku's vision. Or stay here. Become my apprentice. Embrace the dark side of the Force. I will teach you how to tear buildings apart with your mind. I will teach you how to see the future before it happens. I will teach you how to crush the life from those who wronged you with a mere thought. You will not be a hero, boy. You will be a god. The offer hung in the freezing air of the cavern. Izuku closed his eyes. If this had happened yesterday, he would have rejected it. He would have recited All Might's slogans about justice and saving people with a smile. He would have called this spirit a villain and run away. But yesterday, he had hope. Yesterday, he believed the system worked. He saw Bakugo's sneering face. Take a swan dive off the roof. He saw his mother's weeping face. I'm sorry, Izuku. He saw All Might's hollow, apathetic eyes. Be realistic. They didn't want him to be a hero. They wanted him to know his place. They wanted him to be weak. Izuku opened his eyes. The vibrant emerald green of his irises caught the red light of the holocron, darkening them into a sickly, venomous shade. Teach me, Izuku whispered. Kravos smiled. It was a terrifying, jagged expression. If you are to walk this path, you must understand the foundation of our order. Repeat the code of the Sith after me, boy. Let the words burn away the weakness in your soul. Izuku nodded slowly, scrambling to his feet. He stood before the glowing red pyramid, the ancient dark side energy swirling around him like a violent, invisible storm. Peace is a lie. There is only passion, Krivos intoned, his voice vibrating the stones beneath Izuku's feet. Peace is a lie, Izuku repeated, his voice surprisingly steady. He thought of the peace that all might supposedly maintained. A peace that ignored the suffering of the weak. A peace built on the bruised bodies of the quirkless. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through passion, I gain strength, Izuku said, feeling the heat of his anger rising in his chest. His passion wasn't to save people anymore. His passion was to prove them all wrong, to show them what true power was. Through strength, I gain power. Through strength, I gain power. As Izuku spoke the words, the invisible pressure in the room seemed to funnel into his body. The tips of his fingers began to tingle. He felt an awareness expanding outward. He could sense the microscopic spiders crawling in the cracks of the cave. He could sense the rhythmic crashing of the waves outside. It was intoxicating. Through power, I gain victory. Through power, I gain victory, Izuku echoed, his voice growing louder, carrying a dark, resolute edge. He imagined standing over Katsuki Bikugo. He imagined standing over All Might, not to kill them, but to make them look up at him and realize exactly what they had created. Through victory, my chains are broken. Through victory, my chains are broken. The chains of being quirkless. The chains of being Deku. The chains of a society that categorized human worth by biological accidents. He felt them shattering. He felt an absolute, terrifying freedom washing over him. Krivos raised his ghostly, armored arms. The red light of the holocron flared to a blinding intensity. The Force shall free me. The Force shall free me. Izuku shouted, the words tearing from his throat. As he screamed the final tenet of the Sith code, a shockwave of dark side energy erupted from his small, 14-year-old frame. The invisible blast hit the walls of the cavern, blowing centuries of dust into the air and violently shaking the ground. Small rocks plummeted from the ceiling, shattering against the floor. Izuku stood in the center of the maelstrom, panting heavily. The air around him seemed to warp and distort with raw, unfiltered power. He looked at his hands, watching in awe as a faint, dark static danced across his knuckles. It wasn't a quirk. It was the fabric of the cosmos, bending to his emotional will. Krivos lowered his arms, looking down at his new apprentice with an expression of dark triumph. Yes, the Sith Lord hissed, his voice practically purring with satisfaction. The power is yours. But raw power is a wild beast. It must be tamed. It must be sharpened into a blade that can pierce the heart of your enemies. The training will break your mind and body. You will experience pain that makes the beatings of your childhood look like a mother's embrace. I don't care, Izuku said softly, looking up at the spirit. The boy's eyes had changed. The bright, innocent green was gone. As he tapped into the well of rage and hatred required to channel the dark side, the edges of his irises had begun to bleed into a piercing, sulphurous yellow. Break me? Remake me? I will do whatever it takes. Then from this day forward, Izuku Midoriya is dead, Krivos declared. He died on a rooftop, discarded by his idol. You are a vessel of the dark side now. You are Sith. Izuku stared into the crimson light of the holocron. He thought of his mother, sitting at home, waiting for a son who was never coming back. A pang of guilt hit his heart, but he ruthlessly crushed it, feeding the sorrow into the burning furnace of his new power. If he went back, he would forever be weak. Only in the shadows could he become strong enough to change the world. He reached out his hand, palm open. He focused on the holocron hovering above the pedestal. He didn't think about the mechanics of it. He just willed it to move. He demanded the universe to obey him. With a sharp snap, the holocron flew across the space between them, landing solidly in Izuku's outstretched palm. He closed his fingers tightly around the cold, dark glass. Izuku is dead, the boy with the yellow eyes whispered to the empty cave, his voice dripping with a cold, terrifying certainty. There is only the master, and the apprentice. Excellent, Krivos rasped, fading back into the red light of the pyramid, his voice echoing purely in Izuku's mind now. Now we begin the work. We will forge you into a weapon. We will build an empire in the shadows. And when the time is right, my apprentice, we will show this world of false heroes the true meaning of power. Izuku turned his back on the entrance of the cave, walking deeper into the labyrinthine darkness of the pre-quirk ruins. He didn't need a flashlight anymore. The red glow of the holocron lit his path, casting long, monstrous shadows against the ancient walls. Above ground, the city of Muzidifu continued on, blissfully unaware. Pro-heroes filed their paperwork, civilians praised the defeat of the sludge villain, and a blonde boy went to sleep plagued by an unexplainable, gnawing guilt. They all believed that the world was safe, protected by the unyielding pillars of hero society. They did not know that beneath the crashing waves of the Black Coast, a seed of ultimate darkness had just been planted in the most fertile soil imaginable, a broken heart. The era of the quirk was beginning its slow, agonizing death. The revenge of the Sith had begun. The rain in Muzidifu fell in heavy, relentless sheets, washing the grime of the city into the gutters. It was a cold, miserable downpour that matched the atmosphere inside the local police precinct. Inko Midoriya sat in a stiff plastic chair, clutching a damp tissue in her trembling hands. Her eyes were bloodshot, swollen with a week's worth of unshed tears that kept finding new reservoirs to pull from. Across from her, a weary-looking police officer with a minor mutation quirk that gave him the ears of a hound was typing rhythmically on his keyboard. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Midoriya," the officer said gently, his canine ears drooping in genuine sympathy. "We've swept the route from Aldera Junior High to your apartment. We've checked the local hospitals, the train stations, and the security feeds. He just drops off the grid after leaving the commercial district. But he wouldn't just run away." Inko sobbed, clutching her purse to her chest as if it could protect her from the nightmare she was living. "Izuku is a good boy. He's gentle. He loves heroes. He wanted to go to UA High School. He wouldn't just vanish." The officer sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Ma'am, I have to ask again. Did anything unusual happen the day he disappeared? Was he being bullied? The statistics for quirkless use. Well, they aren't favorable when it comes to depression or runaway cases." Inko flinched as if struck. Quirkless. The word had been a shadow over her family for 10 years. She thought of her son's forced smiles, his obsessive notebook scribbling, the faint burn marks she sometimes found on his school uniforms that he always blamed on accidents in science class. I don't know," she whispered, burying her face in her hands. "I should have known. I'm his mother, I should have known." Miles away, sitting in the dark of his bedroom, Katsuki Bakugo stared at his hands. Small, involuntary pops of nitroglycerin sparked across his palms, casting brief, harsh shadows across his walls. His room was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against his window. "Take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in your next life." The memory of his own voice played on a loop in his mind, growing louder and more distorted with every repetition. It had been an agonizing week. At first, when the extra hadn't shown up to class, Katsuki felt a smug sense of victory. The nerd had finally gotten the message. He had finally given up on his delusional, pathetic dream of standing on the same stage as Katsuki. But then the days dragged on. 2 days. 4 days. A week. Then the police had shown up at the school. Katsuki swallowed hard, a lump of cold, heavy ash sitting in his throat. He had been attacked by a sludge villain that same afternoon. He had nearly suffocated to death, surrounded by pro-heroes who stood by uselessly because their quirks weren't suited for the situation. It was the most humiliating, terrifying moment of his life. But worst of all, Deku hadn't been there. Whenever Katsuki was in trouble, whenever he fell off a log in the river as a child, or scraped his knee, that annoying, bushy-haired nerd was always there, offering a hand. Looking down on him. But that day, Deku was gone. Did he do it? The thought was a venomous snake coiling around Katsuki's lungs, squeezing the breath out of him. Did the stupid nerd actually jump? I didn't mean it, Katsuki whispered to his empty room, the words tasting like battery acid on his tongue. He clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut as if he could physically block out his own guilt. I didn't mean it, you stupid nerd. Don't be dead. Don't you dare be dead. He gritted his teeth, his guilt rapidly fermenting into his default state, rage. When I find you, Deku, I'll kill you for making me feel like this. But Katsuki Bakugo would not find Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya was already gone, buried beneath layers of stone, suffering, and dark-side corruption. Month 3, the Crucible. Smack. A jagged stone the size of a grapefruit struck Izuku squarely in the ribs, sending him sprawling into the freezing, muddy water at the bottom of the cavern. He gasped, his lungs burning as the icy water shocked his system. He coughed up a mixture of seawater and blood. Pathetic, the echoing, baritone voice of Darth Krivos boomed from the glowing red holocron sitting on a ledge above. You rely on your eyes. You rely on your fragile human reflexes. You are reacting to the stone, boy. You must sense the stone before it leaves its resting place. Izuku slowly pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. He was completely stripped from the waist down, wearing only the frayed remains of his black middle school pants. His pale, freckled skin was a canvas of fresh bruises, shallow lacerations, and deep purple welts. His muscles trembled, screaming in agony from weeks of chronic malnutrition and brutal physical conditioning. I can't see in the dark, Izuku gasped, spitting blood onto the stone floor. The dark is your ally. It hides you, it nourishes you, it blinds your enemies. Kravos roared, the red light of the holocron flaring violently. Your physical sight is a distraction. Close your eyes. Reach into the void. Feel the hatred in your chest, feel the humiliation of your past. Let it burn, and through the fire, look at the world. Izuku closed his eyes. He was so tired. A tiny, fragile part of him wanted to curl up in the mud and die. He missed his warm bed. He missed his mother's katsudon. Mom! No! Kravos' voice was a psychic spike driven directly into Izuku's frontal lobe. Izuku screamed as a wave of telekinetic agony racked his body. Do not seek comfort. Comfort is the assassin of ambition. Think of the explosive boy. Think of the blonde giant who crushed your dreams. Hate them. Izuku's fists clenched in the mud. He dug deep into his soul, bypassing the sorrow and finding the vast, bubbling reservoir of rage he had unlocked on that rooftop. He visualized Bakugo's sneer. He visualized All Might turning his back. His breathing slowed. The shivering stopped. The pain in his ribs faded, replaced by a cold, numbing euphoria. There is only passion. With his eyes still tightly shut, Izuku felt the cave around him shift. He didn't see it with light, but with a strange, omnidirectional awareness. He felt the moss clinging to the walls. He felt the scuttling of a crab near the water's edge. And he felt the intention of the ancient Sith spirit above him. Another stone was lifted by Kravos' phantom telekinesis. It hurled downward, aiming squarely for the back of Izuku's skull. Without opening his eyes, Izuku twisted his torso, leaning sharply to the left. The stone whistled past his ear, missing him by millimeters, and shattered against the floor. Again, Kravos commanded, a dark satisfaction weaving into his tone. 3 stones lifted. They flew in from different angles. Izuku ducked, sidestepped, and rolled. He felt their trajectories traced in the air a split second before they moved. It was precognition, a whisper from the Force, a reflex driven by his connection to the dark side. Good. Now, strike back. Izuku stopped moving. A heavy boulder, roughly the weight of an anvil, hovered in the air directly in front of him. Lift it, Kravos ordered. Izuku opened his eyes. The bright, innocent emerald green was completely gone, replaced by a sickly, glowing yellow. He raised his right hand, his fingers curling into a claw. He didn't imagine picking it up with his muscles. He seized it with his mind, treating the boulder as an extension of his own burning rage. The boulder shuddered. Through power, my chains are broken. Izuku snarled. He violently swept his arm to the side. The heavy stone launched across the cavern as if fired from a cannon, smashing into the cave wall with enough force to powder the rock into a cloud of white dust. Silence fell over the cavern. Izuku stood panting, staring at the destruction he had caused with a mere thought. A terrifying, exhilarated smile crept across his bruised face. Yes, Kravos whispered softly in his mind. You are beginning to understand. The quirkless boy is dying. The Sith is taking root. Month 6, The Heist. The Musidifu underbelly was a far cry from the glittering hero agencies of the upper city. Here, in the labyrinth of abandoned industrial parks and smog-choked alleys, villains and black market dealers operated in the blind spots of heroes' society. A rusted corrugated metal door stood at the back of an old auto parts factory. 2 thugs stood guard. One had the head of an iguana, the other was a hulking brute with arms made of living concrete. They were guarding a warehouse owned by Jiren, a well-known underground broker, currently holding a shipment of illegal support gear and rare mechanical components. The rain masked the sound of his approach. The concrete thug blinked, squinting into the dark alley. "Hey! Did you hear something?" "Just rats, man," the iguana muttered, shivering in his cheap jacket. "Heroes don't come down this far without a squad." "No. Someone's there." From the shadows, a figure emerged. He was short, clearly young, draped in a heavy, tattered black tarp fashioned into a hooded cloak. The rain cascaded off the hood, completely obscuring the upper half of his face. Only a sharp, callous chin and a cruel, set mouth were visible. "Hey, kid! You're lost," the concrete thug barked, stepping forward, his massive fist grinding together. "Get out of here before I make paste out of you." The boy didn't stop walking. His steps were measured, silent, devoid of any hesitation. "I warned ya!" The thug lunged, swinging a concrete fist that could have easily crushed a car door straight at the boy's head. The boy didn't even flinch. He simply raised his left hand, holding 2 fingers up. The thug's momentum completely halted. He froze in midair, a look of absolute bewilderment crossing his face. Then, the bewilderment morphed into sheer, unadulterated terror. The boy slowly pinched his 2 fingers together. The hulking thug suddenly dropped to his knees, his hands flying to his throat. He gagged, his eyes bulging as an invisible, crushing pressure clamped down on his windpipe. He clawed desperately at his own neck, trying to peel away hands that weren't there. "What the hell?" The iguana thug panicked, pulling a sidearm from his jacket. Before he could aim, the boy swept his right hand out. A blast of kinetic force, silent, invisible, and devastating, slammed into the iguana thug like a freight train. He was thrown 20 feet backward, crashing violently through the rusted metal door of the warehouse, falling unconscious instantly. Izuku stepped past the choking, dying brute on the ground. He didn't look down. He felt a brief, microscopic twinge of horror at what he was doing, but Krivos' voice echoed in his mind, "They are insects. They stand between you and your destiny. Crush them." Izuku tightened his grip slightly, ensuring the brute passed out from lack of oxygen, then released the forced choke. He wasn't a senseless murderer. Death without purpose was a waste of energy. He stepped into the warehouse. Using the flashlight he had scavenged, he navigated the crates of illegal weaponry and support items. He bypassed the guns, the explosives, and the armor. They were crude, inelegant. The tools of cowards who relied on technology to compensate for weakness. He found what he was looking for in a high-security lockbox in the back. A high-density power cell, capable of outputting massive electrical charges. Several cylinders of thermoresistant Beskar-equivalent alloy, used for extreme temperature support gear. And most importantly, a portable, high-pressure synthesis furnace. He loaded the materials into a duffel bag. As he walked out of the warehouse, stepping over the groaning bodies of the guards, Izuku felt a profound sense of detachment. He had just assaulted 2 grown men, armed criminals with quirks, and he had swatted them aside like flies. 10 months ago, he would have cowered in fear. Now, he felt only a cold, quiet superiority. He was no longer playing their game. Month 8, The Bleeding. The deepest chamber of the cave was suffocatingly hot. The portable synthesis furnace glowed with a blinding white light, illuminating the jagged runes on the walls. Izuku sat cross-legged on the floor, his upper body bare, revealing the terrifying transformation he had undergone. The soft, rounded boy was gone. In his place was a weapon. His musculature was densely packed, lean and scarred. His skin was pale from lack of sunlight, making the dark, branching burns of force lightning misfires on his arms stand out starkly. With a mechanical hiss, the furnace unlocked. Izuku reached in with a pair of heavy tongs, retrieving a small, glowing object. He dropped it into a basin of freezing seawater. Steam violently erupted, filling the cave. When the steam cleared, Izuku reached into the water and pulled it out. It was a synthetic kyber crystal. He had painstakingly created it using the chemical compounds and pressure furnace he stole, guided by the ancient blueprints in Krivos' holocron. It was roughly the size of his thumb, faceted perfectly, and glowing with a pure, brilliant white light. It is flawless, Krivos observed, the ghostly figure hovering beside him. A perfect conduit for the Force. But right now, it is dormant. A blank slate. A Jedi would meditate with it, bonding with it through passivity and peace to turn it blue or green. But you are Sith. You must break its will. You must make it bleed. Izuku held the white crystal in the palm of his hand. It felt warm, almost alive. It hummed with a gentle, soothing vibration. How? Izuku asked, his voice deeper now, rough from lack of use. Pour your pain into it, Krivos commanded. Force it to feel your agony. Force it to feel the betrayal of your idol, the cruelty of your peer, the pathetic weakness of your past. Dominate it. If you fail, the crystal's pure energy will shatter your mind. Begin. Izuku closed his eyes. He wrapped both hands around the crystal and reached out with the force. Instantly, his mind was flooded with a blinding white light. The crystal was resisting him. It projected feelings of peace, serenity, and balance. It felt like a warm embrace. It felt like his mother's hugs when he was a toddler. Stop, the crystal seemed to whisper in his mind. Let go of the anger. Rest. Tears pricked Izuku's eyes. A wave of overwhelming exhaustion washed over him. For a moment, he wanted to surrender. He wanted to curl up in that warmth and forget the cold, dark cave. Fight it! Krivos roared in the physical world. Izuku snarled, his yellow eyes snapping open. He forced the warmth away, erecting a mental wall of jagged, hateful spikes. No, Izuku thought, projecting his will directly into the crystal. Peace is a lie. He forced the memory of the rooftop into the crystal. He made it feel the crushing despair of All Might's words. He made it feel the burning explosion of Bakugo's quirk destroying his notebook. He made it feel the agonizing isolation of 10 years spent at the bottom of the food chain. The white light in his mind began to flicker. Izuku pushed harder. He screamed, his voice echoing off the cave walls. He poured every ounce of his hatred for Hero Society, every ounce of his self-loathing, and every shred of his dark side power into the small stone. The crystal grew physically hot. It began to burn his palms, searing the flesh, but Izuku refused to let go. Smoke rose from his closed hands. Submit! Izuku roared with his mind. Submit to me! A deafening, psychic crack echoed in the chamber. The soothing vibration of the crystal died. The warmth was gone, replaced by a dark, pulsating, violent heat. Izuku slowly opened his blistered, smoking hands. The crystal was no longer white. It was a deep, malignant blood red. It pulsed like a living, bleeding heart, radiating an aura of pure, concentrated malice. Izuku let out a ragged breath, a cruel smile forming on his lips. Over the next 2 days, Izuku did not sleep. He sat at the stone pedestal, surrounded by the stolen alloy, wires, and power cells, using his telekinesis to manipulate the microscopic components with absolute precision. He assembled his weapon. It was not a refined, elegant weapon of a civilized age. It was a brutal, heavy cylinder of dark metal, exposed wiring, and aggressive, angular emitter shrouds. It looked like a piece of industrial machinery, heavy and dangerous. When the final casing clicked into place, Izuku stood up. He held the hilt in his right hand. His thumb rested over the ignition switch. He took a deep breath, feeling the dark side swirl around him, eager for release. He pressed the switch. Snap hiss. A blade of pure, crackling crimson plasma erupted from the emitter. The sound it made was terrifying, a deep, aggressive, tearing hum that sounded like a predator growling. The red light bathed the cavern in a bloody hue, casting Izuku's scarred face in sharp, demonic shadows. The heat rolling off the blade was intense, smelling of ozone and burning air. Izuku gave the blade a swift, experimental twirl. It felt weightless, perfectly balanced, moving faster than his eye could follow. He swung it at a thick stone stalagmite. The plasma blade passed through the solid rock with zero resistance. A moment later, the top half of the stalagmite slid off, the cup perfectly smooth and glowing with molten orange heat. Izuku stared at the weapon. The ultimate equalizer. A blade that could cut through any armor, any shield, and any quirk. A Sith's blade, Cravo said, bowing his spectral head. The instrument of your vengeance. Month 10, the UA entrance exam and the birth of Null. The massive gates of UA High School swung open, and the chaos began. Hundreds of teenagers sprinted into the Faux City arena, firing their quirks, desperate to prove their worth. In the center of the madness, Katsuki Bakugo was a force of nature. He propelled himself through the air with continuous explosions, a vicious grin plastered on his face. Die! He roared, slamming an explosion directly into the chassis of a 3-point robot, blowing it into scrap metal. He was unstoppable. He was racking up points faster than anyone else in the arena. The teachers in the observation room were undoubtedly watching him, marveling at his raw power and combat instinct. This was his moment. This was the first step on his path to becoming the #1 hero. He landed on the roof of a fake building, panting slightly, looking down at the carnage of robots below him. But as he scanned the crowd of panicked extras running below, his crimson eyes instinctively searched for a head of messy green hair. He looked for the nerd scribbling furiously in a notebook, muttering under his breath about robot weak points. He wasn't there. Katsuki's grin faltered. The thrill of the destruction suddenly felt like ash in his mouth. He blew up another robot, but his heart wasn't in it. The victory felt completely, utterly hollow. He was standing on the mountaintop, but the one person he had always secretly wanted to look up at him was gone. Miles away, beneath the crashing black waves of the coast, Izuku Midoriya stood before the glowing red holocron. He was fully dressed. Over the past few weeks, he had raided several more underground caches, assembling an outfit suited for his new life. He wore a high-collared, sleeveless black tunic made from a lightweight, blast-resistant polymer. Dark, loose-fitting combat pants were tucked into heavy, steel-toed boots. His forearms and shins were wrapped in dull, dark gray armor plating. A heavy leather belt hung around his waist, the heavy, metallic cylinder of his lightsaber clipped prominently to his side. Finally, a dark gray, ragged hood was pulled over his head, casting his glowing yellow eyes in deep shadow. He looked nothing like a hero. He looked like a nightmare. The spirit of Darth Kravos hovered before him, examining the boy, no, the young man, he had forged. 10 months, Kravos said, his voice echoing with solemn pride. 10 months ago, a weak, crying child walked into my tomb. Today, a Sith stands before me. Your body is a weapon. Your mind is a fortress. You have mastered the basics of telekinesis, precognition, and the blade. You are ready to emerge from the shadows. Izuku stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. What is my first command, Master? To conquer this world, you must first break its spirit, Kravos explained. Your society relies on symbols. The symbol of peace. The invincible heroes. You must show them that their symbols are fragile. You must bleed them, slowly, deliberately, until the masses realize that the heroes cannot save them. Only then will they beg for the order that only the Sith can provide. Izuku nodded slowly. The plan was clear. He wouldn't just attack blindly. He would dismantle Hero Society piece by piece. But Izuku Midoriya cannot do this, Kravos continued, his voice lowering to a dramatic whisper. Izuku Midoriya is the weak, quirkless boy who died. To wield the dark side, you must shed your past. You must take a title that strikes fear into the hearts of your enemies. A name that represents your purpose. Kravos floated closer, extending a ghostly hand to hover over Izuku's hooded head. In the language of the Sith, a true lord claims a mantle. You are the absence of their power. You are the gap in their genetic superiority. You are the terrifying void that will consume their society. Tell me, who are you? Izuku raised his head. Beneath the cowl, his yellow eyes burned with a terrifying, absolute conviction. The boy who wanted to save people with a smile was truly dead, buried beneath layers of dark side corruption and righteous fury. He touched the hilt of his lightsaber. I am the end of their era, he said, his voice smooth, cold, and utterly void of humanity. I am Darth Null. Rise, Darth Null, Kravos commanded, the holocron flaring brightly. and let the galaxy burn. Katsuki Bakugo sat near the back of the bus, his arms crossed over his chest, glaring a hole into the back of the seat in front of him. Around him, the chatter of Class 1A was a relentless, irritating buzz. Kirishima was loudly comparing his hardening quirk to Tetsutetsu's from Class B. Ashido and Kaminari were laughing about something inconsequential. Ajiri, who insisted on being called Tsuyu, was bluntly interrogating Todoroki about his aloof nature. It was normal. It was a perfectly ordinary day for a group of elite Hero Course students on their way to a rescue training exercise, and Katsuki hated it. He hated all of it. He rested his chin on his fist, turning his gaze to the blur of the city passing by the window. It had been nearly 10 months since the sludge villain incident. 10 months since Izuku Midoriya had vanished off the face of the earth. The police investigation had gone completely cold. There was no body, no ransom note, no footage. Just a yellow backpack abandoned on a rooftop, and a grieving mother whose wails Katsuki could still occasionally hear through the thin walls of their adjoining apartment complexes. He jumped. He actually jumped, and they just haven't found him, a dark voice whispered in Katsuki's mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw tightening until his teeth ached. He had achieved everything he said he would. He had scored first place in the UA entrance exam. He had crushed the quirk assessment test. He was sitting on a bus surrounded by the best of the best, officially on his way to becoming the #1 hero. Yet, an invisible weight sat squarely on his chest, suffocating him. He had won the race, but the victory felt stolen. Every time he unleashed an explosion, he expected to hear the frantic scratching of a pencil and the breathless muttering of a green-haired nerd analyzing his technique. The silence that followed his triumphs was deafening. "Hey, Bakugo?" Kirishima's voice broke through his dark reverie. "You okay, man? You've been glaring at that seat for 10 minutes. You look like you want to murder the upholstery." "Shut up, shitty hair," Katsuki growled, snapping his head forward. "I'm just thinking about how I'm gonna crush all of you in whatever this rescue training is." "Rescue training isn't a competition, Bakugo." Ida chopped his hand through the air, his engine calves whirring slightly. "It is about cooperation and saving lives." "Whatever," Katsuki scoffed, slumping lower in his seat. At the front of the bus, Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, cracked one bloodshot eye open from within his yellow sleeping bag. He observed the explosive blonde boy. Bakugo possessed an immense, undeniable talent, but his psychological state was a jagged mess. Aizawa had read the boy's middle school file. He knew about the missing quirkless student. He knew Bakugo was a powder keg carrying a lit match of guilt. "We're here," Aizawa announced gruffly, unzipping his sleeping bag and standing up. "Quiet down and get off the bus in an orderly fashion." The unforeseen simulation joint, the USJ, was a marvel of modern hero engineering. A massive, glass-domed structure that housed half a dozen distinct catastrophic environments, a ruined cityscape, a torrential shipwreck zone, a landslide terrain, and a raging mountain fire. Waiting for them at the entrance, clad in their bulky, astronaut-like hero costume, was the rescue hero, 13. As 13 gave their speech about the inherent dangers of quirks, how powers meant to save could easily be used to kill if left unchecked, Katsuki found himself staring at the massive central fountain of the plaza. He didn't know why, but a strange shiver crawled up his spine. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. It wasn't the ambient chill of the USJ's climate control. It was a sudden, distinct feeling of wrongness. A heavy, sinking sensation in his gut, like the moment a roller coaster tips over the edge of a precipice. Down in the central plaza, the lights illuminating the fountain suddenly flickered. Then, they died completely. Aizawa's head snapped toward the plaza. The water in the fountain sputtered and stopped. In the center of the dry basin, a pinprick of dark purple mist appeared. It didn't expand like a gas. It tore open like a wound in the fabric of reality. The mist spiraled outward, forming a massive, swirling vortex of absolute blackness. "Gather together and don't move," Aizawa barked, his voice instantly dropping its lethargic drawl, replaced by the sharp, authoritative command of a seasoned pro-hero. 13 instinctively stepped in front of the students. From the black vortex, a hand emerged. It was unnaturally pale, clutching the edge of the portal. A man stepped through. He was entirely covered in disembodied, embalmed hands gripping his face, his arms, his chest. Following him was a towering, nightmarish behemoth, a creature with exposed, bulging black muscles, a bird-like beak, and a grotesque, exposed brain sitting atop its skull. Behind them, dozens, then hundreds, of armed criminals poured out of the portal, filling the central plaza like a swarm of locusts. Villains, Aizawa said, pulling his capture goggles down over his eyes. No way they could get into a UA facility without a plan. Down in the plaza, the man covered in hands, Tamura Shigaraki, tilted his head back, scratching furiously at his own neck. His manic, bloodshot eyes scanned the terrified teenagers standing at the entrance. "Where is he?" Shigaraki rasped, his voice echoing eerily in the cavernous dome. "I went through all the trouble of bringing this whole crowd, and All Might isn't even here. Maybe if I kill a few kids, the symbol of peace will show up to play." The next 10 minutes were a blur of absolute, unmitigated chaos. The Mist villain, Kurojairi, had bypassed Aizawa and enveloped the students, scattering them across the various deadly zones of the USJ. Katsuki and Kirishima were dropped into the ruins zone, instantly surrounded by thugs. Katsuki didn't hesitate. He unleashed his pent-up rage and guilt upon the villains in a flurry of blinding, deafening explosions. But the true nightmare was unfolding in the central plaza. Shota Aizawa was a master of stealth and quick takedowns, but he was fighting a war of attrition. He had taken down over 30 villains, darting through the crowd like a shadow, erasing their quirks and snapping their bones with his capture scarf. But his eyes were bleeding from overuse. He was reaching his limit. Hidden in the murky water of the shipwreck zone, just at the edge of the plaza, Tsuyu Ajiri and Minoru Mineta watched their teacher fight with a mixture of awe and sheer terror. "He's amazing," Mineta sobbed quietly, clinging to the edge of the submerged boat. "He's beating all of them." "No," Tsuyu croaked, her keen amphibian eyes tracking Aizawa's slowing movements. "He's exhausted. And he hasn't even fought the leader yet." As if summoned by her words, Aizawa lunged at Shigaraki. Aizawa's scarf lashed out, but Shigaraki didn't dodge. He caught the dense carbon fiber cloth, nullifying Aizawa's momentum. Aizawa's eyes widened. He blinked, his quirk deactivating for a fraction of a second. It was all Shigaraki needed. His hand clamped around Aizawa's elbow. "Eraserhead," Shigaraki whispered. "You're cool. But you're a one-trick pony." The fabric of Aizawa's sleeve disintegrated into dust. The decay spread instantly to his flesh. Aizawa screamed, a raw, agonized sound that made Tsuyu's blood run cold, as the skin, muscle, and bone of his right elbow crumbled away. Aizawa desperately kicked Shigaraki away, rolling back, cradling his ruined, bleeding arm. "Nomu," Shigaraki said lazily. The behemoth with the exposed brain moved. It didn't run, it simply vanished, reappearing behind Aizawa with a speed that defied its massive bulk. Before Aizawa could turn, the Nomu drove its fist into his back. The sickening crunch of Aizawa's spine snapping echoed across the plaza. The hero collapsed, his face smashing into the concrete. The Nomu straddled him, grabbed Aizawa's left arm, and twisted it backward until it snapped like a dry twig. Aizawa's agonizing scream ceased, replaced by the wet, gurgling sound of a man drowning in his own blood. The Nomu grabbed his head and began to repeatedly, mercilessly smash Aizawa's face into the floor. Crack! 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 "Stop!" Tsuyu whispered, tears welling in her large eyes. She covered her mouth, her body trembling violently. "He's dead," Mineta wailed, completely breaking down. "We're all gonna die." Shigaraki turned his gaze toward the water. He had heard them. "Kurojairi," Shigaraki muttered, turning away from the bloody pulp that was Eraserhead. "One of the students escaped. Get 13. I'll handle the stragglers here." Shigaraki moved toward the edge of the shipwreck zone with terrifying speed. Tsuyu froze. The instinct of a frog facing a snake paralyzed her. Shigaraki leaped across the shallow water, landing directly on the shore in front of her. He reached out his hand, all 5 fingers extended, aiming directly for Tsuyu's face. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Tsuyu closed her eyes, preparing for the agony of decay. She thought of her little brother and sister. She thought of her parents. She was going to die here, in a fake puddle, before she ever got to be a hero. But the hand never made contact. A sound abruptly cut through the chaos of the dome. It was a low, resonant, subaudible hum that seemed to vibrate not in the air, but in the marrow of their bones. The temperature in the USJ plummeted instantly. The simulated climate control system shrieked, overwhelmed by a sudden, unnatural localized blizzard of pure, spiritual cold. The remaining water in the central fountain flashed into solid ice. Every single light bulb in the dome, from the plaza to the outer zones, shattered simultaneously in a shower of sparks and glass. The USJ was plunged into twilight, illuminated only by the faint sunlight filtering through the tinted glass ceiling far above. Shigaraki's hand was an inch from Tsuyu's face. He suddenly stopped, a bizarre gasp escaping his chapped lips. He couldn't move forward. It felt as though he had just walked into a solid wall of dense, freezing water. What? Shigaraki hissed, his eyes darting frantically around. Kurogyri? Is this you? Then, the air in front of Shigaraki violently exploded. There was no fire, no smoke, no sound of an impact. It was pure, kinetic trauma. An invisible, telekinetic battering ram of biblical proportions struck Tamura Shigaraki squarely in the chest. Shigaraki didn't fly back, he was launched. He tore through the air, skipping off the concrete of the plaza like a skip stone, violently tumbling backward for 50 feet before slamming into the icy base of the central fountain. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, his ribs fractured, the embalmed hand on his face knocked completely askew. Shigaraki Tamura! Kurogyri cried out, abandoning his assault on 13 to warp to his master's side. Tsuyu opened her eyes, gasping for air. She looked around, utterly bewildered. Mineta was hyperventilating beside her. Then, they heard the footsteps. Clack. 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 Heavy, measured footsteps echoed from the darkened corridor leading to the entrance facility. Every eye in the plaza, the conscious villains, the bleeding Eraserhead, the terrified students, and the furious Shigaraki, turned toward the shadows. From the darkness of the corridor, a figure emerged. He was of average height, cloaked in a heavy, tattered dark gray mantle. Beneath the cowl, his face was entirely obscured by the deep shadows, but two eyes pierced the darkness. They were a brilliant, unnatural, predatory sulfur yellow, ringed with a sickly, inflamed red. The air around him seemed to warp and distort, heavy with a suffocating, oppressive malice that made Shigaraki's bloodlust feel like a child's temper tantrum. Who the hell are you? Shigaraki rasped, struggling to his feet, clutching his fractured chest. Are you a hero? You're not on the UA roster. The figure did not answer. He slowly raised his right hand. Resting in his palm was a heavy, industrial cylinder of dark metal. His thumb depressed a switch. Snap hiss. A blade of pure, crackling, crimson plasma erupted from the hilt. The deep, tearing hum of the lightsaber filled the quiet dome. The brutal red light washed over the plaza, casting long, demonic shadows across the concrete, illuminating the blood pooling beneath Aizawa. The heat radiating off the weapon instantly melted the frost that had just formed on the ground near him. The Sith Lord stepped fully into the plaza, his yellow eyes locking onto Shigaraki. Villains, Darth Null spoke. His voice was cold, distorted slightly by the dark side, carrying a resonant, metallic echo that commanded absolute authority. You invade this sanctuary? You spill blood. You claim to stand against society. Null slowly lowered the point of his crimson blade toward the ground, casually stepping over the groaning body of a thug. Yet you act like petulant children throwing a tantrum. Chaotic. Unstructured. Pathetic. Shigaraki's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated rage. He hated being looked down upon. He hated being called a child. Noma! He screamed, his voice cracking. Kill him! Tear him apart! The Nomu dropped Aizawa's limp body. The beast let out a deafening, ear-piercing screech and charged at Null. The concrete shattered beneath the Noma's feet as it accelerated, moving faster than a bullet. It was a mass of pure, biologically engineered muscle, designed to go toe-to-toe with all might. Its massive fists pulled back, ready to cave this arrogant stranger's skull in. Null did not take a stance. He did not brace for impact. He simply stood there, watching the beast approach. Tsuyu screamed, expecting the stranger to be turned into a red mist. Time slowed down for Darth Null. Through the dark side, he didn't just see the Nomu charging, He saw the trajectory of its fist a full second before it swung. He felt the crude, mechanical impulses of its exposed brain. It had no mind. No passion. It was an empty husk. A slave to genetics. Disgusting, Null thought. At the absolute last microscopic fraction of a second, Null pivoted neatly to his left. The Noma's fist passed harmlessly through the space his head had occupied a millisecond prior, the shockwave of the punch cracking the concrete 20 feet behind Null. Using the Noma's own massive forward momentum against it, Null simply brought his lightsaber up in a tight, vertical arc. The crimson plasma blade met the Noma's bicep. There was no resistance. The blade did not cut the flesh. It annihilated the molecular bonds of the matter entirely. The superheated plasma passed cleanly through muscle, bone, and tendon. With a sickening hiss of flash-boiled blood and ozone, the Noma's right arm was completely severed from its body. The beast tumbled forward, crashing into the ground, a confused, screeching garble escaping its beak. Shigaraki laughed, wiping the blood from his chin. "You idiot! Noma has shock absorption and hyperregeneration. You can't beat him with a sword. He'll just grow it back and crush you." Null turned slowly, his red blade humming. He looked at Shigaraki with an expression of profound pity. The Noma pushed itself up, its body attempting to trigger its regenerative quirk. But nothing happened. Where the arm had been severed, there was no spurting blood. There was no exposed tissue to knit back together. The lightsaber's extreme heat had instantly cauterized the wound, sealing the blood vessels and fusing the cellular structure into a block of blackened, charred ash. The regeneration quirk had nothing to work with. The body believed it was already sealed. Shigaraki's laughter died in his throat. His eyes darted to the blackened stump. "What? Why isn't it healing?" "Noma! Heal. Your ignorance is staggering," Null said, taking a slow, measured step toward the beast. "You rely on biological tricks. A mutation cannot heal what no longer exists. This beast is an abomination. A slave to your twisted science." The Nomu, lacking the intelligence to understand fear, charged again, wildly swinging its remaining arm. Null didn't dodge this time. He raised his left hand. A localized wave of telekinetic force slammed into the Noma's legs. The beast's knees buckled under the immense, unnatural gravity, forcing it down. As the Noma fell forward, Null stepped in, a blur of motion. Humwish. The lightsaber traced a horizontal arc of red light. The Noma's remaining arm hit the floor, cauterized instantly. The beast was now a limbless stump, thrashing on the ground, screeching mindlessly. Null stood over the monster. He looked down at the exposed, pulsating brain sitting atop its skull. This creature was the pinnacle of Quirk Society's darkness. A human being stripped of its will, pumped full of genetic powers until it became a godlike slave. It was everything Izuku Midoriya had hated about this world, magnified into flesh. "Rest, biological refuse," Null whispered. Null extended his left hand over the Noma's exposed brain. He didn't use the lightsaber. The blade was for combat. This was an execution. He curled his fingers inward, forming a tight, agonizing claw. Through the force, Null seized the physical matter of the Noma's brain. Shigaraki watched in paralyzed horror as the protective membrane around the brain began to indent, squeezed by invisible, crushing fingers. The Noma let out one final, ear-shattering shriek. Null clenched his fist shut. With a wet, sickening pop, the brain imploded. Black blood and gray matter burst outward, splattering against the concrete. The beast's body convulsed once, violently, and then went completely, permanently still. Absolute silence descended upon the USJ. Tsuyu, Mineta, the conscious villains, and Shigaraki stared at the dark figure standing over the unkillable monster. He had dismantled their ultimate weapon in less than 20 seconds. He hadn't even breathed hard. Shigaraki began to hyperventilate. He stepped backward, his hands scratching at his neck so violently he drew blood. "Cheat, you're a cheat. That's not fair. Kurogyri. Get us out of here. Now." Kurogyri's mist expanded, wrapping around Shigaraki. "We must retreat, Tamura. This variable is too dangerous." Null raised his lightsaber, prepared to launch a telekinetic wave to crush the mist villain's core, when a massive explosion rocked the entrance of the USJ. The heavy steel doors were blown completely off their hinges, flying into the dome and crashing into the ground. Standing in the doorway, wreathed in dust and steam, was a towering figure. His normally bright, smiling face was set in a scowl of pure, unadulterated fury. He wore his Golden Age suit, his muscles tense and ready for war. "Have no fear, students," All Might boomed, his voice devoid of its usual cheer. "Because I am here." The #1 hero leaped from the entrance, crossing the distance to the central plaza in a single bound. He landed with an earth-shattering shockwave, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. When the dust settled, All Might froze. He had expected a war zone. He had expected to fight the villains who had threatened his students. Instead, he saw his colleague, Eraserhead, bleeding out on the floor. He saw the portal villain retreating, and in the center of it all, he saw the dead, brain-crushed remains of a massive beast, standing over which was a cloaked figure holding a blade of pure red light. "What is the meaning of this?" All Might demanded, his blue eyes locking onto Null. From the ruins zone, having fought his way back to the plaza, Katsuki Bakugo emerged. He was covered in soot and sweat, panting heavily. He stopped at the edge of the plaza, taking in the scene. He saw the dead monster. He saw All Might. And then, Katsuki looked at the cloaked figure. The figure slowly turned his head to look at the new arrivals. The red light of the lightsaber cast a horrific glow inside his hood. But the wind from All Might's landing had pushed the cowl back, just a fraction of an inch. Beneath the shadow, Katsuki saw a glimpse of pale, heavily scarred skin, a smattering of familiar freckles, and a tuft of messy, dark green hair. But it was the eyes that paralyzed Katsuki. They were yellow, burning with a demonic hatred, but the shape of them, the wide, expressive shape. He had seen those eyes looking up at him from the dirt for 10 years. Katsuki's heart stopped. The breath vanished from his lungs. The explosions popping in his palms instantly died. "No," Katsuki whispered. His legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees on the concrete, his red eyes wide with a terror he had never known. "No. It can't be." All Might, sensing Bakugo's shock, stepped forward. "Villain! Drop your weapon and step away from my colleague." "Who are you?" Darth Null deactivated his lightsaber. The red blade snapped back into the hilt with a sharp hiss. The dome plunged deeper into shadow. Null looked at All Might. The man who had broken him. The man who stood at the pinnacle of this false, putrid society. A surge of dark, intoxicating rage swelled in Null's chest, but he clamped down on it. It was not time yet. He was powerful, but to fight All Might directly, here and now, would be a foolish risk. Null's yellow eyes drifted from All Might to the kneeling, trembling form of Katsuki Bakugo. "Deku." Katsuki choked out, a single tear cutting through the soot on his cheek. The word sounded like a dying plea. Null tilted his head slightly. The voice that answered did not sound like the nervous, stuttering boy they both remembered. It was resonant, cold, and utterly dead. "Izuku Midoriya died on a rooftop," Null said, the words echoing across the silent plaza, striking All Might like a physical blow. The hero's eyes widened in horrifying recognition of the voice. "He was a casualty of your arrogance." Null raised his hands, the dark side of the force swirling around him, lifting the debris of the shattered concrete into the air. "Heroes, villains." Null's voice boomed, amplified by the force, filling the entire dome. "You are two sides of the same counterfeit coin. You fight for scraps in a society built on biological accidents. You are slaves to a broken system." Null unleashed a massive, radio burst of force energy. It didn't target the people, it targeted the USJ itself. The shockwave hit the glass dome above, shattering thousands of panes of reinforced glass simultaneously. A torrential rain of glass shards rained down upon the plaza. All Might instinctively shielded the unconscious Aizawa and the terrified Tsuyu with his massive body. Bakugo just knelt there, staring at the figure, oblivious to the glass cutting his arms. "I will tear this society down to its foundations," Null's voice echoed through the raining glass. "I will bring true order to this world." By the time All Might stood back up, shaking the glass from his shoulders, the central plaza was empty. The villains were gone. The mist was gone. And the red-bladed phantom had vanished, melting back into the shadows from whence he came. Only the dead beast and the chilling echo of a dead boy's voice remained. All Might fell to his knees beside Aizawa, his massive hands trembling. He looked toward the spot where the dark figure had stood. A profound, suffocating sense of dread settled over the symbol of peace. He remembered the rooftop. He remembered the fragile, quirkless boy who had begged him for a scrap of hope. What have I done? All Might thought, his heart shattering. What did I create? In the ruins of the USJ, the era of heroes had suffered its first mortal wound. The Sith had returned, and he wore the face of their greatest failure. The underground world of Japan did not panic easily. Villains, black market brokers, and crime syndicates operated on a strict diet of violence and shifting power dynamics. They were accustomed to the rise and fall of kingpins, but the whispers bleeding out from the USJ incident were different. They did not speak of a new gang leader or a powerful villain aiming to dethrone All for One. They spoke of a ghost, a specter with eyes like dying suns and a sword made of bleeding light, who had casually dismantled the League of Villains' ultimate bioweapon in under a minute. They called him the Phantom of the USJ. He had no established crew, no known territory, no registered quirk that matched the terrifying display of telekinetic slaughter he had unleashed. Sitting in the oppressive, damp darkness of his coastal cavern, Darth Null meditated on these ripples of fear. He floated a full 3 feet off the stone floor, his legs crossed, his breathing slow and rhythmic. Around him, dozens of heavy, jagged rocks orbited his body like a miniature asteroid field, held aloft by the passive, monstrous gravity of his connection to the dark side. Fear is the soil in which our order takes root, the spectral voice of Darth Krivos echoed from the red holocron resting on the pedestal. You have struck a psychological blow against the heroes. You have shown the villains that their crude genetic mutations are obsolete. But fear without infrastructure is fleeting. A shadow cannot strangle a society. You need hands. You need resources. Null opened his eyes. The rocks orbiting him instantly dropped to the floor, shattering with deafening cracks. His yellow eyes practically glowed in the dim light. The League of Villains is disorganized, Null spoke, his voice carrying that chilling, metallic resonance. Shigaraki is a man-child throwing a tantrum. He wishes to destroy society without a vision for what replaces it. He is a dog chasing a car. Then look beyond the petty children, Krivos instructed, floating closer. Look to the old world. Before these quirks dominated your society, organized crime ruled the underworld. Yakuza. They have money. They have political blackmail. They have compounds, laboratories, and soldiers who understand hierarchy. Null stood up, smoothing the front of his dark tunic. The Shai Hasaikai. They operate in the shadows, clinging to their former glory. Their leader, Kai Chisaki. Overhaul. His quirk allows him to disassemble and reassemble matter. He believes quirks are a disease, a hypocrite who relies on his own disease to cure the others, Krivos sneered. He is a king of a dying castle. Take his castle, my apprentice. Butcher the king. Claim his throne and his treasury to fund our war. And if his soldiers resist, then they will learn the true meaning of the word overhaul, Krivos replied, his phantom form fading back into the red pyramid. Remember the fundamental law of our order, Null. The rule of 2, 1 master and 1 apprentice. 1 to embody power, and the other to crave it. You are my apprentice, but in the physical realm, you are the master. Find your instrument. Build our empire. Null unclipped his lightsaber hilt from his belt. He didn't ignite it, simply running his thumb over the cold, heavy metal. He was going to war. The Shai Hasaikai compound was a sprawling, traditional Japanese estate located in a quiet, unassuming district. On the surface, it looked like the home of a wealthy, conservative family. Beneath the surface, it was a subterranean fortress, a labyrinth of concrete corridors, laboratories, and holding cells. Kai Chisaki, the young boss of the Hasaikai, sat in his pristine, sterile office. He wore his signature plague doctor mask and white gloves, examining a vial of red liquid on his desk. This was the future, the quirk-destroying drug. Distilled from the cursed, miraculous blood of the girl in the basement. Boss, a voice buzzed from the intercom on his desk. It was Kurono, his right-hand man. We have a situation. Perimeter cameras on the east wall just went black. Chisaki didn't look up from the vial. A hero raid? Night Eye? No. It doesn't look like heroes. The sensors didn't pick up a breach. The feed just died. Like the wiring was crushed from the inside out. Chisaki narrowed his eyes. He hated anomalies. Anomalies were dirty. They were chaotic. Send Rappa and Tengai to investigate. If it's a stray gang looking to make a name for themselves, leave their bodies on the street as a warning. Understood. 5 minutes passed. Chisaki placed the vial back into its velvet-lined case. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany door to his office shuddered. It didn't open. It didn't break. It bowed inward, the solid wood groaning as if a massive, invisible weight was pressing against it from the hallway. Chisaki stood up, his gloved hands twitching. Mimic, he barked into the room. Is someone in the corridor? Joy Iranaka, Mimic, who was currently merged with the concrete walls of the underground complex, manifested his face in the plaster near the ceiling. Boss. I don't know what's happening. Rappa is gone. Tengai is down. He's just walking through them. I tried to crush him with the walls, but he pushed back. My head feels like it's going to explode. Who is he? Chisaki demanded. Before Mimic could answer, the mahogany door violently exploded inward. It wasn't kicked open. It was reduced to splinters, blasted into the room by a kinetic shockwave that shattered the glass windows behind Chisaki's desk and knocked the plague doctor backward. The dust settled, swirling in the hallway lights. A figure stepped through the ruined doorway. He was clad in dark gray and black, a tattered cloak billowing slightly from the displaced air. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but two venomous, yellow eyes locked onto Chisaki. Kai Chisaki, the intruder spoke. The voice was smooth, cold, and dripping with an ancient authority. Your lease on this syndicate has expired. Chisaki regained his footing, brushing a speck of dust off his jacket. He was furious. His sterile environment had been contaminated. You're the one the broker networks are whispering about, Chisaki said, his voice muffled by the beak of his mask. The Phantom from the USJ. You have a lot of nerve breaking into my home, walking dirt onto my floors. Do you have any idea what my quirk does? I know exactly what your biological parlor trick does, Darth Null replied, taking a slow step into the office. You deconstruct and reconstruct matter. You fancy yourself a god of flesh and stone. But you are blind. You manipulate the shell, Chisaki. I command the soul. Die, disease, Chisaki snarled. He slammed his gloved hand onto the floor of his office. Instantly, the wooden floorboards and concrete foundation erupted. Massive, jagged spikes of stone shot forward like a tidal wave, moving at supersonic speeds, aimed directly at Null's chest to impale him a dozen times over. It was an attack that no physical hero, not even All Might, could simply stand and take. But Darth Null did not stand. He did not dodge. Through the dark side, Null had seen the spikes forming before Chisaki even touched the floor. He felt the intent, the shift in matter, the trajectory of the attack. Null simply floated. He lifted effortlessly off the ground, rising 3 feet into the air. He extended his right hand, his fingers splayed. The tidal wave of deadly stone spikes halted midair, a mere 2 feet from Null's body. The stone groaned and shuddered, caught in the unbreakable grip of Null's telekinesis. Chisaki's eyes widened behind his mask. What? He pushed harder, trying to force the matter forward, but it was like trying to push a mountain. You rely on touch, Null stated, hovering over the jagged spikes, looking down at the Yakuza boss with utter disdain. You are bound by the physical laws of this pathetic world. I am not. Null clenched his right fist. The massive stone spikes abruptly shattered into a million pieces of harmless gravel, dropping to the floor. Before Chisaki could react, Null snapped his left hand forward. A wave of force energy slammed into Chisaki's chest. The Yakuza boss was thrown backward, crashing through his own desk and slamming into the back wall. Mimic! Chisaki roared, coughing blood into his mask. Crush him! The walls of the office began to warp and stretch. The ceiling plummeted downward, threatening to flatten Null into a bloody paste. Mimic's face appeared in the plaster, screaming in exertion. Null didn't even look at the ceiling. He unclipped the metallic cylinder from his belt. Snap hiss. The brilliant, crackling red blade of the lightsaber ignited, filling the ruined office with the stench of ozone and the deep, terrifying hum of a caged predator. Null swung the blade in a wide, horizontal arc above his head. The plasma blade sliced through the descending concrete ceiling as if it were warm butter. The superheated energy severed the connection between Mimic's consciousness and the matter he was controlling. Mimic shrieked, a raw, agonizing scream that echoed through the compound, as the severed concrete crashed harmlessly around Null. The walls returned to normal, and Mimic dropped out of the plaster, clutching his head, completely incapacitated by the psychic shock. Chisaki pushed himself up from the debris of his desk, his breathing ragged. He pulled off his gloves, exposing his bare hands. Panic, a deeply unfamiliar emotion, clawed at his chest. His quirk was absolute. It was death on contact. But he couldn't touch this demon. The demon didn't even touch the ground. "I am the cure!" Chisaki screamed, losing his clinical composure. He lunged forward, slapping his bare hands against the walls, the floor, the debris. The entire room turned into a maelstrom of flying stone, steel beams, and shattered glass. Chisaki hurled a hurricane of matter at Null, attacking from every conceivable angle. Null moved. He didn't run, he danced. He used the force to propel himself through the air, flipping, twisting, and spinning through the barrage. His movements were a terrifying hybrid of Makashi's elegant, precise footwork and the raw, aggressive kinetic energy of Form V. The red blade was a blur. Null deflected steel beams, sliced boulders in half, and vaporized glass shards before they could touch him. He moved with a supernatural grace, guided by precognition, always exactly where the debris wasn't. He closed the distance in 3 seconds. Chisaki reached out with his bare right hand, desperate to make contact with Null's chest, to blow the Sith Lord into a shower of blood. Null stepped inside the Yakuza boss's guard. His left hand shot up, his fingers clamping around Chisaki's wrist with the crushing force of a hydraulic press. Chisaki gasped. He tried to activate his quirk to disassemble Null's hand, but a freezing, terrifying pressure invaded his mind, shattering his concentration. The dark side paralyzed his will. "Your quirk is located in your hands, is it not?" Null whispered, his yellow eyes burning inches from Chisaki's terrified face. Such a glaring, pathetic weakness. Null brought the red blade up. There was a flash of crimson light, accompanied by the horrific hiss of flash-boiled flesh and bone. Chisaki didn't scream immediately. The shock was too absolute. He stumbled backward, staring in uncomprehending horror at his right arm. It ended bluntly at the elbow. There was no blood. The stump was perfectly cauterized, glowing a faint, sickening orange. My arm!" Chisaki wheezed, his brain failing to process the visual information. Null didn't hesitate. He spun on his heel, the red blade carving a tight, brutal arc through the air. Humwish. Chisaki's left arm dropped to the floor, severed just below the shoulder. The pain finally caught up. Kai Chisaki, the untouchable overhaul, dropped to his knees, throwing his head back and unleashing a scream of absolute, unmitigated agony. He fell forward, thrashing on the floor, attempting to reach for his severed limbs to reassemble himself, but he had nothing to reach with. Null deactivated his lightsaber. He stood over the writhing, whimpering Kingpin. "You cannot reconstruct what has been burned away," Null said coldly, echoing the lesson he had taught the Nomu. "The Shai Hasaikai belongs to me now. Your assets, your network, your compound. I will spare your miserable life, Chisaki, solely so you can live in the dirt as a quirkless cripple, experiencing the very reality you wish to impose on the world." Null reached out with the force, seizing Chisaki's mind. He didn't just push him to sleep, he violently crushed the man's consciousness, plunging him into a deep, agonizing coma. The compound was entirely silent now. The 8 bullets were unconscious or dead in the hallways. The boss was broken. Darth Null walked to the elevator at the back of the office. He pried the doors open with a wave of his hand and floated down the dark shaft, descending into the deepest, most secure levels of the complex. He was looking for the vault. He needed to secure the Hasaikai's wealth to begin mass-producing the synthetic Kyber crystals and building a network of informants. He found a massive, meter-thick steel door at the end of a sterile, white corridor. Null ignited his lightsaber, and plunged it directly into the center of the vault door. The metal immediately began to glow white-hot, slagging and melting under the intense heat of the plasma blade. Null dragged the blade in a large circle, the heavy steel groaning and warping. With a telekinetic push, the massive circular cutout fell inward, crashing to the floor with a deafening boom. Null stepped through the smoking hole. He expected stacks of yen, gold bullion, or files of blackmail. Instead, he found a child's bed. The room was not a vault, it was a cell. It was cold, damp, and smelled strongly of antiseptic and old blood. In the corner of the room, huddled beneath a thin, ragged blanket, was a tiny figure. Null's yellow eyes narrowed. He stepped closer. A little girl, no older than 6, looked up at him. She had pale, unkempt bluish-white hair, a small horn on the right side of her forehead, and eyes that were a deep, haunting crimson. Her arms and legs were covered in a horrific patchwork of bandages, scars, and fresh needle marks. She was trembling so violently her teeth were chattering. Are you the new doctor? She whimpered, her voice raspy and broken from crying. Are you going to take my blood again? Please, it hurts. Darth Null froze. For the first time in 10 months, the impenetrable armor of the dark side cracked. Beneath the Sith Lord, buried deep within the psychological vault where he had locked his past, Izuku Midoriya opened his eyes. Izuku looked at the bandages. He looked at the terror in the little girl's eyes. He saw the ultimate victim of quirk society. A child tortured, harvested, and discarded by those with power. A sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy crashed into him. Izuku wanted to drop to his knees. He wanted to scoop this little girl into his arms, wrap his cloak around her, and carry her into the sunlight. He wanted to tell her, "It's okay now. I am here." His green eyes flickered, pushing back against the jaundiced yellow of the Sith. The lightsaber in his hand felt unnaturally heavy, like a sin he could no longer carry. "Do not let the weakness consume you," Kravos's voice hissed in his mind, sharp and urgent. "Look closer, boy. Look at her horn. I feel the force swirling around her, but it is bound to her genetics. Her power, it is extraordinary. It alters the very fabric of time and matter." Null blinked. He reached out with his senses. Kravos was right. The aura surrounding the little girl was blinding. It was a quirk, yes, but it was a mutation so profound it bordered on the mystical. Rewind. The ability to revert living matter to a previous state. She is the source of his drug, Kravos whispered. The ultimate weapon. The remnant of the weak boy within you wishes to save her, to be a hero. But what then? Hand her over to the authorities? Let the Hero Commission lock her in a different gilded cage? Let society study her? You know how this world treats anomalies. The crack in Null's armor sealed shut. The green in his eyes was swallowed entirely by the toxic, burning yellow. Izuku Midoriya did not have the power to protect her. Only Darth Null did. "Peace is a lie," Null whispered into the silent room. He deactivated his lightsaber and clipped it to his belt. He slowly walked across the room, his heavy boots echoing off the cold tiles. Eri shrank back, pressing herself against the wall, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the pain. Overhaul always brought pain. Overhaul always told her she was cursed, that her quirk was a disease that needed to be drained. But the pain didn't come. Instead, Null knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. He didn't offer a warm, comforting smile. He didn't speak with the booming, artificial cheer of all might. He reached up with a gloved hand and pulled his hood back. Eri opened her eyes. She looked at the young man's face. He looked like a teenager, but his skin was pale, and his face was covered in faint, branching burn scars. But his eyes were terrifying, yet entirely devoid of the clinical, disgusted look that Overhaul always gave her. They burned with a furious, protective fire. "I am not a doctor," Null said, his voice surprisingly soft, though the dark resonance still echoed beneath it. "And no one will ever take your blood again. Kai Chisaki is broken. He has no arms. He will never touch you again." Eri's breath hitched. "Overhaul is gone? I destroyed him," Null stated simply. "Because he was weak. He relied on your power because he had none of his own." Eri looked down at her bandaged arms, tears welling in her eyes. But my power is bad. I'm cursed. I make people disappear. I hurt people. Null reached out and gently took her small, trembling hand in his. Look at me, child, Null commanded softly. Eri looked up into his burning yellow eyes. Your power is not a curse. The people who told you that were terrified of you. They chained you in the dark because they knew that if you ever learned to control it, you would eclipse them all. Null squeezed her hand. He remembered sitting in the doctor's office, being told he was worthless. He remembered the patronizing looks. He remembered the rooftop. This world is cruel to those who do not fit into their neat, little boxes, Null continued, his voice tightening with suppressed rage. They told me I was nothing. They told you that you were a monster. They want us to weep. They want us to be victims. Null leaned closer, his aura wrapping around the shivering girl like a heavy, suffocating, yet strangely protective blanket. Tears will not save you, Null whispered, the teachings of the Sith flowing from his lips. Sorrow is a chain. The only thing that can protect you in this miserable world is power. You must take your fear, your pain, and the agony they put you through, and you must forge it into anger. Eri stared at him, mesmerized. No one had ever spoken to her like this. They either looked at her with pity or greed. This dark stranger was looking at her like she was a dormant volcano. Anger? She whispered. Yes. Anger is a shield, Null said. It is a fire that burns away the weakness. If you let me, I will take you from this place. I will not put you in a hospital. I will not hand you to the heroes who ignored you. I will teach you how to use your fire. I will teach you how to be so powerful that no one will ever dare lay a finger on you again. He stood up, towering over her, and extended his hand. You can stay here in the dark and wait for a hero who will never come, Null said, extending his hand. Or you can take my hand, and we will burn their empire to the ground together. Eri looked at the offered hand. She thought of Overhaul's sterile gloves. She thought of the needles. She thought of the endless, suffocating darkness of her life. She looked at the stranger's hand. It was scarred. It was dangerous. But it was strong. Slowly, hesitantly, the little girl reached out from beneath the ragged blanket. Her tiny, bandaged fingers wrapped around Null's gloved hand. Null closed his grip securely around hers. A dark, triumphant smile touched his lips. The rule of two is fulfilled, Krivos's voice echoed in Null's mind, purring with dark satisfaction. The master and the apprentice. The circle is complete. Null gently pulled Eri to her feet. She was so weak she could barely stand, so he scooped her up into his arms, resting her head against his shoulder. He draped his heavy black cloak over her, hiding her bandaged form from the cold air of the compound. What is your name? Null asked as he walked out of the ruined vault. Eri, she whispered, burying her face into his dark tunic. I am Darth Null, he replied. And you will never be a victim again, my apprentice. As Darth Null ascended from the basement of the Shai Hasaikai compound, carrying the child who would one day become his deadliest weapon, the balance of power in Japan irreversibly shifted. The Quark underworld had lost the kingpin, but they had gained a dark god. And soon, the heroes would learn that the Phantom of the USJ was not just a passing nightmare. He was the architect of their doom. The Empire of One had found its foundation.